Anup Deshpande. I work right here at Visa in one of the divisions called MapPD or CyberSource. I'm really happy to have this forum going every month for several years now. And I'm lucky to get amazing guests and amazing speakers here every month. Some of our guests come from our audience themselves. For example, Moshe sitting here was our speaker last month, coming from Google, and also our tonight's speaker. So before we go on tonight's speaker, a few little things. This meetup started about 4.5 years ago, and it's going on every month, including December's, where we get about 50-60 people. The only problem to get here is traffic, I know, and that's the reason we see some trickles here and there even after the event has started, which is perfectly fine. We have to move the event from our regular auditorium to this place, so inconvenience regretted, but this time our CEO needs the room for all 5 days of the week. I'm like, interesting, okay. We're Agile, and we're gonna just move and see whoever reaches here are the people who want to know about Agile and are really doing Agile or learning Agile. So we get started there. Few things that we do in this forum with your feedback is to collect more feedback. Key takeaways, that's what you see there. This is a moving forum, so you don't have to really stick to your chair. You can always move, sit with the other group if you want, whenever you want. And also, there are some nice stickies here with the Sharpies. So write down as you learn what are the key takeaways that you're getting. You're not just rewarding yourself by remembering when you write, but also are rewarding our guest as well as the people who couldn't attend, right? So that they get to see, oh, this is what people actually got from this session, and it's amazing. So they look at the pictures and then they want to watch a video, right? So this is that video thing, very sleek stuff that I got a couple months ago. It's a production quality video. It's recording a 4K video right now. And I upload that to our YouTube channel. So you go subscribe to that YouTube channel. The name of the channel is same as the meetup name, Silicon Valley Agile Trends and Leadership. So if you go into YouTube, put in that name, you'll get to see the channel. If you subscribe, every time I push a new video, you'll be able to get a notification and can watch that. Even watching that can get you real good knowledge and some knowledge about what's going on in the community when they ask questions, especially, right? Having said that, another thing that I wanted to mention, I may not mention that in every month, but we are a certified Scrum Agile group, which means you have to go qualify through some paperwork in order to get that. So if you are a CSM, CSP, or certified Scrum practitioner, then you can get 2 CEUs, or the continuing education units, from this, and you can renew your membership through your certification as well as this continuing learning process. If you are a PMI member, and if you are a PMP, PMI ACP, or any kind of other PMI certifications, you get 2 PDUs, professional development units, as well. So just coming here without wasting your money going somewhere else, you're just coming here, feeding yourself, meeting with a great community, having amazing speakers, you can actually get a free renewal from PMI. Every 3 years you need about 60 PDUs, which means about 60 hours of learning. 2 hours every month gets you, in a year, you get like 24 PDUs right there, right? So it's a great way to get your certification updated all the time. So with that, we'll turn over to our, what did I do? I don't want to do this. Okay. So with that, we'll turn over to our speaker, and I got a new bio from him. And it's so interesting. I usually don't read from that. It's just boring. but it's so interesting that I'm going to read a little bit, and I'll go with some of my memory there. But Ron actually tells me that he looks back and knows for certainty that he has been a nerd in his childhood. Amazing. And he's been building radios from kits at the time. That's super intriguing. If we get some time, we want to learn that as well from you, Ron. So he has some software patents already in his repertoire, as well as he has done some compiler level code, embedded devices, and popular shrink wrap software products. So look at his contribution, it's amazing. He has worked many years at Apple Computers as his first management gig, and also continued working with many other companies. I hear Razorfish. He's been a VP of engineering for the software development for many other companies like Charles Schwab, as well as Fujitsu. So ton of talent, tons, right? So we want to learn from him. He has been very famous in the IEEE community as well. He's the author of 3 books? 5 books. I always underestimate you, Ron. 5 books, and with that, I think we got a lot of intro for him, and I think we are all excited to, get him on the stage. So please welcome Ron Lichty.
Thanks, Anu. It sounds like the sound system is on. Yes?
Yeah.
Back in the back? You guys are good? Okay. So I'm Ron Lichty, and the source of this talk came about. I was at Agile Open Northwest in Seattle. And how many people have been at an Agile Open conference? Meet a couple of you. So the way Agile Open conferences work is the people who come do the presentations. And so it's open space design. And I was thinking about, what should I give a presentation on? What should I propose as a presentation? I mean, basically, you get voted onto the island by however many people come to your talk. I thought, what is it that drives people craziest? And it's estimation. And so I train a lot of teams in Agile, and I find, and the method of estimation that I learned 15 years ago, which I have found incredibly powerful over the last 15 years. I find team after team after team, Agile individual after Agile individual after Agile individual has not heard about. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to propose fast, no waste Agile estimating. And that evening, somebody said, I finally have found the reason behind a reason behind estimating and a method of estimating that works, which is what I found 15 years ago. So it's been very gratifying to share. It was very gratifying to share there what I had learned with a whole group of people, and they felt really good about it. So a little bit about me. So I have been at all of these companies. I started as a software developer. I started my nerd career as a software developer. I was a programmer for about 7 years and did compiler code generators and embedded microcontroller software and entertainment software and early PC software, and then cut my teeth managing at Apple, as noted. And spent 6 years managing at Apple, and then have managed at a bunch of companies, some very large, like Fujitsu and Schwab and Stanford, and some very small as 6-person startups. So that whole variance, out of that, I have been, over the last 6 years, I've been consulting really around making software development home in teams and organizations, untangling knots in software development, transforming chaos to clarity in some cases, maybe too many. One of the things that I find is that there are really, every single organization's issues are unique, but they tend to fall into 5 buckets: process, culture, communication, planning, and rigor. And I ran into Agile for the first time in 1999, ran into Scrum for the first time in 2002, and Scrum helps all 5 of those things. It helps all 5 of those buckets. It helps all 5 of those, the issues that are in those categories. And so it's a favorite tool in my toolbox. I am the co-author of the study of product team performance, which there have been 5 studies. I've been co-author of the last 4. They are not regular, but they are, they were annual for a little bit. So the study of product team performance, we asked developers and product managers and project managers and scrum masters and coaches and people on teams all over the world to characterize their team. Is it high performance or low performance or something in between? And then we asked them about practices, and we don't think we're good enough to say what causes teams to be high performance or low performance, but we can correlate what high performance teams do versus low performance teams versus teams that are in between. I also am the author, my 5th book was Managing the Unmanageable, Rules, Tools, and Insights for Managing Software People and Teams. And so that I don't have to carry it home at the end of the night, I'm giving this one away at the end of the night, and I'll raffle it off. And it's one of the very few books on managing programmers and managing programming teams. There are a gazillion books on project management. There are very few on managing programmers and programming teams. So I want to do a little bit of who you all are. So how many of you have waterfall in your past? Ooh, oh, this is going to be a fun group to talk to. How many of you have waterfall in your present? Okay, so maybe a third of the room. How many of you have figured out a way to deliver estimates that are consistent, which is to say they match outcomes? I got half a hand here. Okay, that's good. Not uncommon that we only have half a hand. How many of you get asked for estimates anyway? Yeah. It turns out that our executives keep asking us even when we haven't figured out how to give them estimates. There are reasons that estimates are useful. So my context, I'm going to share with you a little bit of context for this talk, for this subject, for this topic. The first is from Al Shalloway, who said the point is not to do Agile, the point is to be effective. Agile provides us insights. So that's one. So this is not about, you know, we should do Agile, or there's one way to do Agile, or, you know, I don't care. What I'm looking for is how can we be effective? And Agile, it turns out, provides a bunch of insights in that area. And the second comes from the Agile Manifesto. Anybody not know the history of the Agile Manifesto? Everybody's going to sign up for knowing the history of the Agile Manifesto. So the Agile Manifesto, so I got at least one hand. The Agile Manifesto in 2000 was, in the 1990s, there were a bunch of processes that were created. Scrum and extreme programming and DSDM and Agile project management and Kanban and there were a whole bunch of them. And in 2001, Uncle Bob Martin invited all of the founders, all of the creators of all those processes together to a ski resort in Utah, Snowbird, to ski and to talk about what they had in common. Actually, they were looking at, all of them had come up with some not remarkably similar, but there were a lot of overlaps between all of those processes. The 3 that we continue to think about today are Scrum and extreme programming and Kanban, or lean development, as opposed to lean startup, which is different. And they did several things. One was that they came up with the Agile Manifesto, which were a set of 4 values and a set of 12 principles. And they came up with the word Agile as an umbrella term for all of their methodologies and processes and frameworks. So the word Agile was not used before 2001 in this context, and they decided to use it for all of their processes. So it's the umbrella term for all those things. And out of the Agile Manifesto, one of the principles is simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. It's my favorite principle, because I love that phrasing. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done. I like not, and what they're really talking about is not doing wasteful work. And so let's talk about estimating and how we did it in the waterfall way. So my experience was, and I was guilty of taking teams into dark rooms, dark conference rooms for days at a time, and taking projects and breaking them down into features and breaking the features down into every single task, programming task that we might have to do. And then putting time, numbers, against each of those, and we threw them all into Excel spreadsheets that would, on our behalf, add up all of the numbers, and we'd walk out with an estimate of how long that project was going to take. That was wrong. It was inevitably wrong. I think I got one. I think one of my teams got one right. Anybody get an estimate right walking out of one of those rooms? Somebody pointed out to me that even a clock that's not running is right twice a day. And I think that's what happened with my right one probably, was we really lucked out. So, so anybody else have another method of waterfall estimation that was any better than that? Move?
You could try an expert mode where just one person really knows it well, give it 4 weeks, then say, okay, it's going to be a new hire, then say, okay, double that.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes that works too.
Sometimes it works to get an expert to do it.
Yes.
Did that work for you?
It worked for me for a couple times, yeah.
A couple times it worked for you. Okay, so that's better than it worked for me. We alternated between taking the whole team into dark rooms or taking just the experts into dark rooms, and I didn't have very much success doing either one of those. And then, so we have a lot of project managers in the room through the mention of PMI and PDUs and all that kind of thing. So one of the project management approaches is to put percentages against each of our programmers and say, well, Bob underestimates by 20% and Sally overestimates by 30% and Debbie underestimates by 40%, and we get multipliers for each of our programmers. How many people have done that one? I've seen heads nod. Nobody's willing to admit it by raising their hand. No, one person is. And so that was, the idea was that sort of similar to the expert versus the new hire doing it, that we could put percentages of likelihood against that. But what we really want to what we really want is an estimate that actually works. So why do we estimate? So there are a couple of reasons to estimate. One of them is so that, so in Agile, we create backlogs. And we talk about backlogs being ordered by value. But in fact, what we really want is to have backlogs that are ordered by ROI. The reason we want them ordered by ROI is my favorite story, and boy do I wish I had my story fulfilled tonight. I was 3 miles away and it took me, probably about 45 minutes before I arrived from 3 miles away. My favorite story is teleportation. I really wish I could have teleported here tonight. That last 3 miles would have been really cool to teleport, but every time, so it's my highest value story on my backlog, that's the story I put at the very top, is teleportation. And yet every time I ask developers to develop teleportation for me, they tell me it might take an infinite amount of time. that if we pull this into a sprint, because it's at the top of the backlog, we could be working on it for sprint after sprint after sprint after sprint and never finish it. Because they don't know how to tackle it. So we might need to do a spike on teleportation. But regardless of that, any highest number of value divided by infinity means that it goes from the top of the backlog to the bottom of the backlog if instead of ordering by value, we order by ROI. So fundamentally, we're trying to avoid putting teleportation at the top of our backlog and having our developers pull it into a sprint at some point because it's at the top of the backlog. So we want the buck of bang for the buck. We want the I of ROI. It's really important to product owners in ordering a backlog. Secondly, we need some kind of predictability. Our sales team, our marketing team, our CEO needs to be able to tell his or her board. The board wants to know, the CFO wants to know, everybody wants to know when stuff's going to get delivered. It's really, there's, for the purpose of planning for our organization, this is really useful stuff. It enables planning across the organization. By knowing when things are going to deliver, we can put together a plan for when to hire marketing and when to hire sales and when to put all those things in place. And then, and this is for our development teams, maybe the most important one, it builds stakeholder confidence. If we are good at estimating, we can keep the stakeholders out of our area because they believe us when we tell them something in subsequent times. So that's a really important one for our teams. So we've got some really important reasons on why to estimate. On the other hand, we have some big problems with estimating. So here are some leading software engineering lights who said, in the software field, we're expected to accurately estimate the time it will take to do a job that requires creative thought, that usually requires team members to learn new concepts, and that pushes team members to provide undivided attention for long periods of time. Do you agree that those are three of the issues? I think it understates it. I think there are more, so I added a few more. Not only that, but we're always building something new. If we weren't building something new in software, we should buy it off the shelf. Yeah, we're building another one of those, but the only reason we're building another one of those instead of buying another one of those is that our purpose for this thing is unique. We've got some unique purpose to use that software for that's different from anything that exists out there in the world, or we should be buying it. And sometimes we don't buy stuff, but I had an EVP actually at Schwab who told my team, if you guys build another billing system, I'm going to fire you all. She knew how hard billing systems were, how many issues there were with billing systems. She was not having any of our billing systems. Again, those were all available off the shelf. So we're always building something new, and new pretty much precludes clarity. It's really hard to understand what it is we're building when we're building something new. And users' understanding of what it is that they want evolves as we build it. Anybody ever had a customer say, I know that's what I asked for, but that's not what I want? Yeah, a lot of us have had that experience. And it's understandable because it's really hard to know what we want when we haven't seen it before. Steve Jobs talked about the Mac, and no one would have asked for a Macintosh. They just would have asked for a faster PC. So, what did the need to estimate lead us to do? So we talked about that, taking developers into dark rooms. It led us to do work task breakdowns. So PMI teaches us to do work task breakdowns. So we're going to do an exercise, and so we've got people at tables. Good, we're fairly evenly divided. I'm going to move you, to the table behind you. And we're going to do an exercise. So the exercise is, I want to eat some fruit. And we have, the fruit we're going to eat is a pineapple. Now the exercise is not, how long does it take to eat the fruit? We're trying to take into account the overhead of eating this fruit by understanding how much overhead is required, and overhead is the time to prepare the fruit for eating, to prepare a serving of the fruit, and the time to clean up after eating it. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice the waterfall estimation method, work breakdown. I'm going to give you each a sheet of paper with a pineapple, so that's our fruit. And I want you to, together as a team, so this is what we did. We walked into dark rooms with our teams. With your team, figure out all of the tasks required to prepare a serving of pineapple and to clean up after you've eaten, after the eaters have eaten that serving of pineapple. All right, and I'm going to give you 8 minutes to do your task breakdown. What I want at the end is what's the total amount of time for preparation and cleanup for that serving of pineapple, for all of the tasks that you come up with. Okay? You've all got pens at your tables. Go.
Break it down into
Okay, so how was that?
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Tasty.
It's tasty. Oh, I like it. It's so palpable you can taste it.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm looking at the ROI, right?
You know what?
Looking at the ROI.
Looking at the ROI. So, able to do that breakdown?
yes.
8 minutes was enough or not?
More than enough.
Yes.
More than enough. So how long does it take it? So I think some of you would have taken longer.
We assumed that we were working in a smaller kitchen, so where everything is in reach. So based on that, we were about 6.5 minutes.
About 6.5 minutes. You guys are still working.
We failed.
You're done. You're done. You needed a little bit more than 8 minutes. Yeah. The other 3 teams? 8 minutes was about right?
Yeah. We were double that, but
Yeah.
we had a huge kitchen though.
Yeah, so how does preparing and cleaning up after preparing a pineapple, so first of all, any of you have experts on your teams? You've got an expert, so you...
By the way, I would say that knowing what it takes could have made it take longer to put the estimate together. Because you're thinking of things that may not have come up or other details, without consideration to the agile approach of what you need to do.
Yeah, so you get a bunch of experienced developers in the room, it could take longer.
That's right.
Yeah.
What about this? What about that?
Yeah,
What did
I've
they-
never seen that happen.
Yeah, really. All those questions come out from what are you thinking?
Yeah, it takes a really long time. You've got a full page filled out.
15.5 minutes.
You got what?
We're very slow. 15.5 for everything.
15.5 for preparation and cleanup.
Yeah.
So what did this team get?
About 30 minutes.
About 30 minutes.
One thing.
I'm sorry, 13 minutes. 13 minutes, 15 minutes,
14.
14.
Well, we had 6.5.
You have 6.5.
That's true.
They don't kill it, that's why.
No, we also.
How long did you guys have back there?
An hour and 40 minutes.
An hour and 40 minutes. That's wonderful. You're confirming a pineapple. Right? So it includes the trip to the store for the pineapple. For the pineapple?
Less the research stuff.
Okay. All right, good.
But
So,
also, you're assuming that based on what you have, I want to eat it, so one person is eating it, so we don't necessarily need it, we didn't need to cut the whole pineapple, so we only did enough for one person, for me.
Right, so you got the shortest one and you were doing just the serving for me, because that is what we said. I want to eat some fruit.
Right.
Okay.
We actually tasted our fruit with a little quality control in there. Relaxation. You gotta make sure it's good, right?
All right.
Yes.
All right.
We're lucky we
Yeah,
didn't
the
try
cook
it.
always tastes food, right? So, so how does preparing and cleaning up a pineapple compare to software development?
Much easier.
Much easier. Much easier. Why?
Less complex.
Less complex. I don't know. There's a lot of complicatedness on these sheets of paper.
Because we can imagine what
Process is
You can imagine what it's going to be like because
It's not building new.
it's not building new. You've all done it before. Now, I don't know that all of you have done it before, but you had experts. I bet each of your tables had experts of people who've done it before, right? Whereas in software, it's new. Right, so, and despite the fact that you've all done it before, it took 6.5 to 8+ minutes to figure out all of the steps and add them all up. All right, so after the break, we're going to talk about how to do this in a less wasteful way.
Okay.
All right, a less wasteful way, or a way that maximizes the amount of work not done. All right, so that's the promise of after the break. The break is the standard one that Anoop is going to have some lightning talks, and I'm going to turn it over to you to talk
Exactly.
about that.
All right, so for the first timers, this is how it goes. We take a 15-minute break. During the break, you come to me, write down your name and a title of the topic that you want to talk for 3 minutes. It's called a lightning round. There will be only the lucky 3 winners who get to come and talk here for 3 minutes. Anything related to Agile, your experience, good, bad, ugly. Okay? You can come and talk about that. You can share some experience. You can share some tips and tricks. I'm just giving you ideas to your brain to come up with that 3-minute talk. Okay? So give me your name and your title in one of those stickies and just hand it to me in the next 15 minutes and we'll take the first 3 here. Okay? All right, so meet as many new people as possible. 3, we got 2. If someone really is interested in that 3rd slot, they can come by or change if they change their mind, definitely can see me right after 2. The very first one is a lightning talk. It's an amazing topic. It's Agile Parallelism and Resource Planning by Ed. Ed, come on up. We have 3 exact minutes.
Okay. Can you show me the time, or should I time it myself?
I'm gonna show you 2 in 1.
All right. Hi. So my name is Asfandior, short Ed. You don't have time for my background, but I did a bunch of project management, mostly in research area actually. And the biggest challenge for us, and I did a management course at Stanford, right? So one of the first things they teach you is CPM, critical path method, right? And how to do that, which is a way basically doing waterfall, if you may, with all the parallels and all that. The biggest challenge to me is not so much estimating the time, honestly, but it is a really important topic, right? Especially these days. And I think what makes it important is because of things like outsourcing. right? The drag on communication, all that. But so this is how we would do time estimate, right? You would set up your critical path method, which is basically, waterfall, and then you would figure out how you could parallelize it best. If I could take this part and move it over here, right, and put these things together, I could do them all at the same time, right? And that usually shortens the length. It's kind of like a tree, right? You kind of take the branches and prune them in a different way, right? So that was important, and that is also not hard. The hardest part. Okay, so once you have done that, you go to each branch, right, of that thing, and you say, okay, I think this is going to take this many days, plus or minus this amount, right? So you don't give it exact time, and then you basically do a simulation, and that would give you exact time. But the hardest part is resources. Because things fall apart, you drag somebody. My job was always to go, rescue this thing, right? And that's what is the worst. To me, that is the biggest challenge that screws up everything. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, Ed. It's always good to have members talk about their experience. The second one is a little different, which is going to bring us a great perspective. This person actually runs a business in India and has a reverse experience of all of us sitting here, where we keep talking about offshore. We get the offshore here to talk to us about what is their experience, what is their hat, what do they listen and how do they react to stuff. So Atul is going to speak about Agile and offshore point of view. Welcome, Atul.
Hi, I'm new to this forum, and clearly can see that it's a kind of thriving community over here, and interesting topic, and Ryan, your insights are really helpful. Right, like Anup said, I'm representing offshore for you now, so we can meet and then discuss the challenges. Really, what we think Agile brings on, and the advantages that Agile can present to us. I can share a small case study that we were in the phase of transition from typical waterfall to Agile. By the way, I'm Atul. I'm founder and MD of Vatsa Solutions. We are into services, and typical services is you never say no to customers. That's what the motto is of running software services company. But it's not always it's not always right thing to do. This customer of ours, we have been working with the customer. They are in healthcare product development. They are a healthcare product, and they are partner with GE and Meditech and Allscripts and all big wigs. And we were working for them for last 7 to 8 years before we switched to Agile. At the point when the switching came along, we were quite comfortable with what we were doing, like waterfall. It was typical, 10, 12 people working on the same project forever. For last 6 years, the tasks were being assigned. They were being tracked, and efficiency was being calculated. But it wasn't as the clarity was missing. That's what we felt. Not everybody in the team was aware what's going on. It was just the task which was assigned to the developer. The developer was working on just that and was not getting the clear, bigger picture where the task goes. How will my work unfold into entire project, and then how will the customer use the piece of software that I'm writing right now. So and then people were losing on learning a lot of things of healthcare domain as such. It's not about only development. It's not about delivery. Every project should bring some value to the developers as well. It's not just the customer. Developer needs to learn something. So that's when we thought of proposing Agile methodology to our customer. And the biggest challenge that we experienced in that was working Agile and Scrum out with the distributed teams, because our customer was also having a development team over here, and then we also had, although it was small, there were four or five people, we were 10, 12 people, and then there was a lot of discussions. How do we go about Scrum planning meeting? How do we go about Scrum, daily Scrums, and there were so many hurdles that we faced. It's not on the paper. It looks it's rosy, but then in reality, it poses tough challenges, especially in case of distributed teams.
Thank you, Atul.
Done? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was the second.
Thank you so much. Great perspective. I gave him another minute or so, but I think it was really a good topic for all of us to listen to. Of course, 4 minutes is not enough at all, but it's a great perspective. So with that, Ron, show us some more magic about it.
Okay, so we've looked at waterfall estimating. So in software, I think the best summary of estimating is John von Neumann's, who said, "There's no sense in being precise when you don't even know what you're talking about." We're building something new. All of you were precise about estimating that pineapple, and yet we got really different estimates. An hour 40, was that? Yeah, that was a really interesting estimate. So there's no sense in being precise when you don't know what you're talking about, let alone when you do sometimes. So, Scrum sizing. So this is all in the context of Scrum. And so I was having a conversation over the break, and so we're not covering the breadth of Scrum, but it requires teams, self-organizing teams, teams in which there's psychological safety, teams in which everyone talks with each other equally, in which they act like Scrum teams. Scrum sizing. One, we are going to use the entire team. So I'm going to give you a caveat, which is we aren't going to use the entire team for more than half a day. There's actually a slight, that was true for me until about 2 months ago when it actually took us 5 hours to estimate an entire backlog. But in general, my experience has been that we can estimate an entire backlog. That's the next piece. We're going to do the entire backlog of stories. We can do an entire backlog of stories in 3 to 3.5 hours. The entire backlog of stories.
How many stories would that be?
So the first time I did it, there were 120. And the first time I did it, so 9 years ago, when I started training teams, I found most of the teams that I was training, we were transforming waterfall to Agile. These days, and so they didn't have stories. These were features, 120 features on their part. These days, I find myself training teams where we're transforming Agile teams to actually be Agile. So from Agile in name only to Agile actually working Agile, Agile that actually works, it's effective. And those may be stories, although often enough I find they're not either. They're also features. So we can take features, we can take stories we don't know whether they're epics or not until we've done the sizing. So we're going to have an entire backlog of stories, and we're going to use the entire team. Question?
have a question. A lot of experts say that actually you should not estimate the entire backlog, or at least
So ignore
Go ahead and
ignore the experts. Go with me for the rest of the talk.
I'm with you.
Okay, go with you for the rest of the talk. So Mike Cohn. So I'm going to go with Mike Cohn, who is one of the experts and who says estimate your entire backlog. So one of the things that I find sometimes, thank you for fixing that. That seems to be more consistent. Thanks, Mita. I oftentimes will walk into teams and the only estimating they're doing is the next sprint. We're estimating the next sprint. That's a different estimation. That is not helpful to figuring out when we're going to be done, which is one of those first two bullets I gave you, and it's not helpful to figuring out what the ROI is on ordering our backlog. We need the entire backlog to be sized in order to do those two things. So we're always going to size stories relative to other stories. The challenge with absolute sizing, anybody read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink? A couple of hands go up. So Malcolm Gladwell, New Yorker writer, wrote an amazing book called Blink, which basically says that our human brains are wired in a way that we can do almost anything. But some things are really hard, and some things we can do in a blink of an eye. And one of the things that we can do and so absolute sizing is one of the things that's really hard. Relative sizing is one of the things that we do in a blink of an eye. So to give you an illustration of that, all of us, I want to invite you to teleport with me to the East Bay Hills above Berkeley. And we're all going to be, and we're also, imagine we're all standing on the top of the East Bay Hills, and we're looking across at San Francisco. In San Francisco, there are a lot of new buildings that have been built in the last year, let alone in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years, a lot of new buildings. And I'm going to point to the two tallest buildings. We're standing on the Berkeley Hills looking across at San Francisco. I'm going to point you to the two tallest buildings. And I'm going to ask you, tell me how tall those two buildings are. That's absolute sizing. And you're going to probably scratch your heads if you weren't one of the architects involved in building those buildings, or you didn't just read in the Chronicle how tall those buildings are. You're going to probably count the number of windows, and try to impute how many feet per story for those. Only it's not as easy as that because there are buildings in front of them that we can't see the whole building, so we're going to have to look at the buildings in front. They have windows that different, and they're spaced differently, and we're going to count those. We're going to try to impute across, and we're going to do this whole thing. And about 10 minutes later, it will look like the pineapple exercise, where we're going to get everything from 13 minutes or 6 minutes to an hour 40 for how tall those two buildings are. If, on the other hand, my question was, which of those two buildings is taller? You would, in the blink of an eye, you'd say, oh, that one is. That one's taller, right? I can tell that one's taller. And then if I said, so how much taller? You would say, yeah, it's about, it's probably 10% taller than the other building. Oh, it's 10% taller. Now if I give you the height of either building, you can tell me the height of the other building. Really, that calculation, so some of you will do that in seconds, and some of you might take as much as a minute or pull out your iPhone to do it with. But we will know the answer to the question of how tall the other building is with relative sizing combined with something that we actually know, which is what are the building's heights. So we're going to leverage relative sizing. So we're always looking at this story versus that story. Which one's bigger? Are they similar in size, or is this one much bigger or much smaller than this, or much longer or much shorter? So you're going to take longer or shorter than the other one. So we are going to use abstract measures. So what most of us use is the modified Fibonacci series. I know teams that use t-shirt sizing. Anybody use t-shirt sizing in this room? Yeah, so we have some practice with that. So I know some teams that use t-shirt sizing, small, medium, large, extra, extra large, and so on. I worked with a team earlier this year that uses animal sizing. They go from bacteria to elephants and whales. I liked it, except the value of the Fibonacci series is we can divide. Numbers are really cool. If we know, what we're trying to do is figure out ROI, and we know what the R is. If our product managers tell us what the value is for stories, then we can divide by the cost and get ROI. And now we can order our backlog by ROI in a very rote kind of manner. I'm not recommending doing it in a rote kind of manner, not inserting our thought processes into that, but it's a really useful first cut at our backlog by ROI. And we typically do Fibonacci. Anybody not know Fibonacci number sequence? Each number is the sum of the previous two numbers. And it's modified when we get to here, because 8 plus 13 is not 20, it's 21. But we do modified Fibonacci, 20, 40, and 100, and we can think of these three numbers as huge, huger, and hugest, or epic, epicer, and epicest, if you'll let me go there. So we're going to use the Fibonacci sequence, and we're only going to do it after relative sizing. So we're first going to do relative sizing without numbers at all. No hours, no days, no weeks, no nothing like that. And then, and only then, do we apply numbers. So, and no equating points and days. Anybody in this room equate points and days? Yeah. I took on an acting CTO role for a startup in Canada, just as it was moving development from Johannesburg, South Africa to Medellin, Colombia. This is an enterprise class application in banking that connects into banks' credit card systems at the back end. And at the front end has 4 different portals, one for retailers, one for banks, one for consumers, and then one for the special sauce of this application. And the application was half done. Half done, half completed by the team in Johannesburg, South Africa. We're moving it to an entirely different, much closer, an entirely different team in Medellin, Colombia. That team in Medellin, Colombia, if we did planning poker, or we did this, we would have, oh, that's a very small story. And that very small story for that team in Medellin, Colombia would probably take them 2 weeks, because they have no idea which file even to open up to look for that code, to figure out where to put it, or where to fix it, or how to do that, and a year later, that 2 weeks would take 2 days. That 2-sized story would take 2 days. So it's still a 2, it's still one of the smallest stories. But in one case it takes 2 weeks, in one case it takes 2 days. And over time, our velocity changes, and our velocity is the translation from our sizing to time. And so if we can get out of equating points and days and hours to using velocity for this purpose, that's a really useful way to go. When we do this equating thing, now we tend to still jump down the same rat holes that we jumped down, that you were jumping down as you were estimating all of those tasks for pineapples. I'm going to get out of that with our next step. So,
Ron,
yes.
the question. So, will you be covering the method to calculate ROI with the Fibonacci estimate?
Ask me that at the end.
The end, okay.
Yeah, because I want to stick with sizing for the moment.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. So there are two solutions that I'm aware of the teams have used. This is the more common one. How many people in this room have used Planning Cooker? Almost everybody in the room. Okay, so quickly, everybody on the team's got a deck of cards with the Fibonacci sequence or the modified Fibonacci sequence on it. Somebody reads a story. Everybody in the team decides whether it's 2 or a 5 or an 8 or a 13 or what it is, and on a signal, everybody holds up their card, and if everybody's holding up an 8, we write an 8 onto that story and move on to the next story. Agreed? That's how everybody else does it, right? Okay. So there's two problems with that, I think. For the first story, where do we start? When we read this first story, I mean, there's no such thing as a 5 or an 8 or a 3 or a 2 or a, there's no such, if that's not real, so where do we start? How do we know where to start? So that's a problem, and then I think it succumbs to guessing. So I see teams all the time that, anybody remember Johnny Carson? Anybody remember Johnny Carson? Johnny Carson was the host of The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson would do this character called the Great Karnak, in which he would hold an envelope up to his forehead and try to guess what was in the envelope. And it feels like sometimes I see teams that are guessing that this is a 5 or this is an 8. And there's no such thing as a 5 or an 8. There's only this story's like that story's a 5, therefore this story's a 5. We want to keep it in that relative sizing thing. So that's a problem with Planning Cooker. So the other method is two-pass release sizing. How many people have done or believe they've done two-pass release sizing? Okay, so I'm not getting any hands. So two-pass release sizing is faster. That's what I'm going to show you. It guarantees that stories are relatively sized to each other, and it provides it provides a double check. It's also known as the Steve Bachman method. So Steve Bachman invented it about 16 years ago. I learned it about 15 years ago from one of his fans, Chris Sims, who taught it to me. There are, surprise, it's called a two-pass system. There are two passes. In the first pass, we take all of the stories in our backlog and order them by size, smallest to largest, least amount of time to most amount of time. Least amount of time for all of the development and all of the testing, to most amount of time for all of the development and all of the testing. All of the tasks that are required. And only then do we apply our number system to them. And it looks like this. So this was a team that I was working with 4 years ago, and we started, actually there's only 120 on the table. We started with 150 cards. So these are actually sheets of paper that have been cut into thirds or quarters. We started because it was easier to print out, but most of our printers, it turns out, will print 4x6 cards. Up there in the upper left-hand corner is the smallest story, and it's a snake, because that's what it took to fit them all onto a conference room table plus an extender. And this is the largest epic in their sequence. And it took 2 hours to get them into that order. And it took 1 more hour to number them, starting up there with, okay, that's a 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Where do the 2s start? Where do the 3s start? Where do the 5s start? Where do the 8s start? Where are the 13s and 20s and 40s? And here are the 100s. Here are our largest epics. Epics. A couple of interesting things about this is it starts with a stack of, in this case, 150 cards. 150 is the most I've ever done. And it turned out that 30 of those were duplicates or redundant or already done. And we were able to throw those out. So we removed cruft from our system. And this was a 3-hour process for this team. So that alone was valuable. It started with that stack, and the first person read the story that was on that card and put it in the center of the table and handed the deck to the next person. And the next person read the story that was on that deck and said, I think this is smaller than or larger than the one that's already on the table, looked around the table to his or her colleagues to say, do we agree? Are we okay with it being smaller or larger? And put it down, and then handed the deck to the next person, and they did the same thing, smaller, larger, or does it go in between? And pretty soon it's, well, I think it fits in here, between these two. And again, there's no numbers whatsoever at this point. We're just getting them on the table in the smallest amount of time to largest amount of time order. And only when we've got them on the table do we actually apply numbers to them. One of the purposes of planning poker is that everybody's holding up a card at the same time. It means that everybody's voting. Everyone is engaged. And the first time I did this, that was my concern, is will we get everyone engaged with this process? It's really important we have everybody engaged. And tangent for a second, how many of you have done Myers-Briggs? Almost everybody in the room has done Myers-Briggs. It's a personality test. About 2/3 of the people in the room, 3/4. So, programmers, 70+% of programmers have the same Myers-Briggs personality. Do you know that? 70+% of us are INTJs. Anybody know what the I stands for? Introvert. Yes. Most of us are, if 70% of us have all 4 of those characteristics, some huge percentage, even huger percentage are introverts. We tend to be introverts. And I had a team that very first time I did this, I had a team that I had one member of that team who put the capital I on introvert. We had the table in the middle of the room, and I realized that I had the team gathered around the table except for one member of the team. She had a chair over in the corner that she was sitting in. And I thought, uh-oh, she's not engaged. Until we got to about the 6th card, and I suddenly realized she was standing at the table with a death grip on the card that her colleague had, who was about to put it down somewhere because it was her code. And she knew that it was harder or easier than her colleague was about to put it down, where her colleague was about to put it down. So if you ever see non-engagement, you can fall back to planning poker, and I encourage you to do that. I've never not had engagement happen as a result of this process. The other piece is, so I'm going to hold off on that actually. So, questions about this process?
I actually did this with Steve Bachman 3 years ago in Pleasanton. He did a meetup in Workday.
All right.
When you said, when I saw the name on the slide, I saw that, and it was very engaging. When you mentioned that if it is not engaging, you should go back to planning poker. We all loved it, and it was very, very engaging for all the tables.
Great. All right. There was a question here, and then here, and then here.
I might have just missed how you get it started with that many cards and
right. So it starts with a deck of cards in which the first person reads the first story and puts it on the table, hands the deck of cards to the next person. The next person now reads the top card. They can be in random order. Reads that top card and says, I think this is smaller. This will take less time or more time than the one already on the table. Gets eyeball agreement. Consent, not consensus, but consent with the rest of the people at the table, and hands the deck to the next person. All right, question here.
After a little bit, you're going to have lots of cards on the table.
Yep.
How do you track, like, if you have a new one? You have to have a mental...
So we're going to come to that. So hold that thought. So nobody ever has new stories come along while they're working on their project. Is that what you're asking?
No, like, if I have a card and there are
okay.
20 on the table.
Okay, so these are not news stories you're asking about. So there are 20 on the table. So it turns out that because everybody's listening to all the stories that are going down, and because they're now in order, there's only 20 of them in order at this point. Pretty easy to, you just kind of walk it up string of cards and say, I think it goes in here. Question over here.
So this seems like a one team's an entire backlog.
It's an entire backlog, yes.
Right?
We're doing an entire backlog of work, so a project's worth of backlog, where that's probably 6 months max.
Okay. So does it sound like you do it once for a while or do it again?
Yeah, so that was what I thought Moo was asking about, was when we get new stories, we'll lay this back out and fit the new stories in and figure out where they go. And so hold that question until we practice this once, because it's a nuance and it's an important one, and I think it's a useful one to have a conversation around. Other questions? Here.
Is this something equivalent to like dragging and dropping user stories by rank in Rally or something? You can do a drag and drop. And how do you do this in a...
How do you do it distributed? There's a tool called Real-Time Board that is easy to do it, and I've recently come to think it might not be too hard to do with Google Draw. But Real-Time Board for sure, and I'll show you a picture of it in a bit. Other questions? Right there.
Did you know this linearly time? I mean, for 100 cars, there are 5,000 limitations, right? In terms of randomness.
Yeah. You've been a programmer. So that's the challenge is trying to take into account all those permutations as we say, well, I think it's going to take longer than that one and less than this one. I think it goes in here. It's remarkable how much easier, it's remarkable how much that is like, which of those two buildings across the bay is taller? All right, one more question.
So, but again, we are doing, so when we have so many user stories, right? So at a time when we are saying that, okay, is it larger or smaller than this specific item? The team would definitely will break it down into tasks. Okay, this has 1, 2, 3, 4 items, and this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. Let me place this one on this place. So again, the team is breaking it down, right? It's not
mentally.
Yes. So we are not saying it, but we are doing the same thing, like breaking it down into tasks and identifying how much time it would take. Again.
So hold that question. I want you to ask that question after we do the exercise.
Okay.
All right. So I want to tell you about a few side effects. So I've been telling you about side effects a little bit. Whether it's 2-pass release sizing or you're doing planning poker, if you do planning poker well, in 3 hours. So one of the reasons I really like relative sizing over planning poker is I am not so sure that anyone can take 120 cards and do planning poker in 3 hours. It seems like 4 times that, maybe.
And a lot of stress
and a lot of stress, yeah. And whereas this is so I was not this team, but I was working with a team in actually not far from here in Foster City. 2 years ago, they only had 85 cards, and it took us longer than 3 hours. It took us three and a half or 3 3/4 hours to do it. It was a startup that the team was very agile, but they had never sized, to whoever asked that question, they had never sized their entire backlog before. They were only doing sizing on a sprint by sprint basis. The product manager had just arrived. She was the director of product management, or VP of product management. She reported to the founder, and the founder had the board breathing down his neck, and so he started breathing down her neck to say, what can we deliver this quarter? And she had no sizing to work with. And so we went into the room and did this, and so I said the translation is velocity, right? So we didn't have velocity. The way we got velocity was to take the work that they had done in the previous quarter and fit it into here. And now we could add up those number of points. We could make that a box for her to fit her quarters planning into. She could create a plan. She then walked that box into the CEO and said, here's what we can deliver. And he said, well, I really like this. And she said, okay, we can take this out and put that in. And so they did that horse trading thing. But they had a box that they could work in, a time box that they could work in, a time box of points that they could work in, because we knew what their velocity for the previous quarter was at that point. So the other thing that teams get out of it is, in 3 hours, they get a sense of what the product manager has in mind for the entire project. So how many of you have gotten 400 pages of requirements in a waterfall plan? What have you got 100 pages of requirements in a waterfall plan? Wait, almost all the room said you worked in waterfall. You didn't get requirements? All right, now I'm getting head shaking. Okay, okay. So we got 100 or more pages of requirements in our waterfall kind of thing. How many of you actually read all of them? How long did it take those of you who did read them all to read all of them? How many of you, when you got to the end of reading all of them, remembered what was at the beginning? In 3 hours, that team understood what was in that project. Right. Now, the other thing about the hundreds of pages of requirements. This is fun. What percentage of those requirements did you deliver? I ask a lot of developers this question. Any idea what answers they give me?
25%.
20 to 25. What? 100%? You work for NASA? I do get a NASA engineer once in a while who gives me something in the 90s. Turns out that when we send people into outer space, we want to get them back.
No, I was from a developer standpoint. You ask them how much of these requirements deliver, like 100%, whatever we give.
Yeah, no, they don't lie to me.
We have delivered, but not on time.
They have delivered, but not on time. Actually, the other question is, what did you deliver that wasn't in the requirements? That's an interesting question, too. So the typical answers I get are somewhere between 15 and 45%. 15 to 45% of hundreds of pages of requirements is what we actually delivered. The rest of that was a waste. And so reading that whole set of requirements wasn't terribly useful, and knowing everything that's up here isn't terribly useful, because we're not going to deliver all those things. In Agile, we don't deliver everything. We deliver the stuff that's got the most value. This is not ordered by value, but we are giving them, actually it's the highest ROI, because we're not going to try to develop teleportation. At least I hope none of you do, until we understand how to develop it. Okay, so shared project understanding is one of the things in 3 hours, at most 5. It surfaces experience and expertise. So occasionally, so those of you who've done planning poker, occasionally you'll see somebody hold up a 3 and somebody else hold up a 13. And the rule is you have a conversation now. And we do the same thing here. So when that introverted programmer came to the table and said, that's my code, that doesn't go there, we had that conversation. We have that conversation, and what we learn is that, oh, Sue, who just joined our company, it turns out that this story represents something that she's written before at her previous company. Nobody knew that in the room, but except for Sue. Sue's written this before. Sue says, I've written it 5 times before. I could write this in my sleep. This is a 3. Bob, why do you think it's a 13? Bob says, well, I don't care how well written your code is, when we put it into our code, there's more technical debt in that area that we're going to insert that code into than anywhere else in our whole application. It's going to, it's going to crash and burn. And it's not going to just crash and burn where we insert that code. It's going to crash and burn in scattered places through our application that I can't predict where they are because it's just so brittle. Nobody here's ever had code like that, I don't think. So we've got Bob who's got experience, and Sue who's got expertise. And in planning poker, we then vote again. We probably come up with an 8 or a 5 or something in between to represent Sue's expertise and Bob's experience. And what we do here is we've got those cards out there. We write Bob and Sue's name on those 2 cards, not to say they will be the developers of it, but to say, boy, we should sure ask them if this one comes to the top of our backlog and we want to develop this, we should sure talk to Sue and Bob about it before we do that. They should be advising on this story. So we want to surface and capture experience and expertise. It engages the entire team in the work. So we've got testers and developers. We've got different kinds of developers. We've got front-end developers and database developers and business logic developers, and we've got different kinds of testers. And each of them brings their thought pattern to how big this is. So we need to aggregate those thoughts about how big this story is. So the advantages over poker is it's faster. It guarantees stories are relatively sized to each other. It's not how many points, but where does it go in the snake? Is this story larger or smaller? And it provides a double check. So the second time through, I very rarely see a second pass through where we're actually putting numbers on where stories don't move. And I think it's because when we create the snake the first time, that's right brain, that's our spatial thinking. And when we're actually putting numbers on, it's left brain, analytical. It's our analytical brain. And so part of it is how fast that goes, that snake is created. But part of it is we're now using our analytical brain and we're saying that, we're in the 3s and this doesn't belong here. It's going to take less time or it's going to take more time. So we rearrange as we go. So there's a real double check that goes on. So it turns out that our client is a caterer. I know I said we want to eat some fruit, but our client's a caterer and they didn't just have pineapple. They had 12 fruit. So what I don't want to do is spend the rest of the night here and not go home until 11 o'clock estimating 12 fruit times 8 minutes. That would not be fun. That would not be fun. So that reminds me of that team with 85, that product manager who had the pressure of the CEO on her. We walked out of the room having done that exercise, and she said, "I never knew estimating could be fun." So take it in that vein. So it's the same problem. How much overhead? Time to clean up, time to prepare serving, time to clean up afterwards, but we have 12 fruit this time. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to give each of your tables 12 fruit, and I want you to use 2 pass sizing. So the first pass, I'm going to give you 5. I'm going to give you a total of 8 minutes to do all 12. And trust me, you can all do that. In 5 minutes, you can order them from shortest amount of time to longest amount of time, and in 3 minutes, you can write numbers onto these cards from using the modified Fibonacci sequence. Okay? So here are your fruit. Okay, so so do not lay them out. So let me give you a caveat. So when we've got only 12, everyone? When we've got only 12, there's a tendency to say, oh, let me just lay them all out, and I'll look for the smallest one, and then I'll look for the next smallest, and then I'll look for the next smallest. When we've got 120, this does not work. That's called simple sort. What we're doing in 2 pass sizing is basically quick sort. we're taking whatever random one is on top, and they may vary. You've all got the same 12 fruit, but they may vary about which one's on top. And the first person puts that on the table and hands the deck to the next person, and the next person says, I think this is less time or more time. You look around the table, you can discuss if you need to, or
Agree with the team,
if you agree as a team, where it goes. And you may discuss as you go along. Okay? All right, go. So how was that? Good. So you went from taking 8 minutes to estimate a pineapple to 8 minutes to estimate all 12. So how was that?
Easier.
Easier. Yeah. Yeah, but you were estimating both time to prepare serving and time to clean up afterwards. In software, we have to do development and QA. So we have to do several types of development and a couple of types of QA, so it's more complex than that. But it's why I introduced both of those at the same time. Did everybody come up with the same sequence? Almost. Actually, what's your largest one?
Durian.
Durian. How many points? 100 points. What's your largest one?
Pomegranate.
Pomegranate. How many points? 20 points. How many points for durian? 8 points for durian. Yeah, so there are a bunch that are the same. I totally agree.
I'm in the order, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but still their order's different too. The durian's the third to the last on that one. And what I want to point out is these are true for your teams.
Right.
You have formed the truth for your team. For your team, you have more willingness to deal with durian than anyone else in the room. Did we have experts on experts with particular fruit on some of our teams?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about that.
So it's not true, but it's not true for me. But I know that other people have expertise in pomegranate because there is a YouTube video that it's, you just crush it like with two moves. And I don't have it, but I pretended that I do. So we discussed it. We discussed here. I said I have the expertise, and somebody else said, but I know from experience that this might affect the other stuff. So we just sized it after our discussion.
So even though she's expert, we thought that this is what the team would take time or size it. Not based on her expertise, but the overall team size. Expertise.
And the unknown about the durian, and I pushed it towards the end. Even though I know a little bit about durian, but it's hard to, where to go as a team.
So who knows about durian in the room? What's the characteristic of durian?
Smells good.
It's like a jackfruit. Durian and jackfruit are kind of similar.
So does jackfruit smell?
Smells, but
Okay, I don't know.
tastes good.
That means it's
But
not
taste-
part of the population.
Yeah, so it's a delicacy for some people, but my belief is that I would get my team upwind of it before I cut it open. Is that a fair assessment? I run into people all the time who say, "Oh yeah, my parents love that stuff," and then they roll their eyes. My parents had it in our freezer, and the whole freezer smelled like durian.
Oh, the freezer.
Everything in the freezer did. In the freezer and everything in the freezer smelled like durian. So the cost.
Really?
Cold, most of it.
No, fresh.
The fridge. That's so much more expensive.
So there are signs in Singapore, maybe, that say, "You bring a durian into this hotel, you'll never stay here again."
Yeah, the sign goes on trains, buses.
You do not bring durian on the train. No durians in this taxi. Yeah. So the smell for some people may be attractive, but not for. But there's a whole population of people. There's a Norwegian fish dish that's like this. Anybody know what that is? North Dakota, they have feeds of. Can't remember the name of it now, but it's a Norwegian delicacy. But you want to be upwind a couple of miles of it if you.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about the cheese?
No, this is
So
fish.
frozen cheese as well.
Yeah, so there are cheeses that are like that too, right? Yeah. So delicacies don't go to everyone. Question.
No, this is actually, so we have an algorithm of how to eat durian. Take it to a potluck.
Yeah. Okay, that's how you would get the whole potluck for yourself.
Well, no, it's somebody else, like the park or something. Like then you don't take it swim.
You take it to somebody else's house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. So pomegranates. So you've seen there's a YouTube video out there. So there's two. Actually, I learned this. I thought walking into my first class where I used this, I always had this programmer equate pomegranate stained shirt. Open a pomegranate, walk away with a stained shirt. I always thought those were equates. Programmer equate. And then somebody said, "Oh no, you open it underwater." Oh, that's useful. You ever thought of that? And then somebody else said, "Well, if you know pomegranates, you just make one cut, turn it upside down, tap it with a hammer, and all the seeds fall out." Really? So if you've got one of those experts on your team, boy, I'd sure be writing their name onto that card and saying, "Hey, you are my pomegranate person. You're gonna tap those seeds out of there for all of us." And I'd probably move it up because I'd be leveraging my pomegranate expert. So one of the things this is useful for recognizing is we really all bring unique expertise to our teams. Your team and your team and your team and your team and your team have each arranged these for your team. They are correct for your team. The order is correct and the numbers are correct. Can we compare points and velocity from one team to the next? No. Points are useful internal to the team. They're an internal measurement that we use for figuring out stuff. So other comments on the exercise?
So how do you do this in a scaled way?
So I showed you 120. Was that the question?
No. How do
you want
do
120 times 8? You want 120 times 8 teams? Yes.
No, my question is, suppose there are 100 people.
Yeah, so that's 120 times 8 teams. So each team's got its own backlog. We're going to create teams that are divided by by, and we're going to give each team its own backlog, and each team is going to do. So one of the things that comes out when we're doing this exercise is Bob or Sue or Bill or George will say, this is dependent on that.
Right.
Right. So one of the facts is that our backlog is actually not just by ROI. It is by ROI, but it's not just by ROI. It also takes into account dependencies, because there are stories we have to do before other stories.
Right.
And we want to make sure we do that. Anu, how am I doing for time?
We're almost out of time.
Almost out of time. Okay, so we want to take dependencies into account and make sure we make sure we do that. And so we'll have all of those teams sitting in the same room, and we'll have them each doing their own, and then doing the circling thing and identifying dependencies from other teams.
Do you need to do an estimation before you divide it into teams, before you allocate the stories to teams?
So the allocating stories to teams generally is by parts of the application. We're going to create cross-functional teams. This is aside from sizing. This is how we organize teams. We organize teams that are, so go look at Henrik Nieberg and how he divided up the Spotify functionality basically by interface. There's a team that owns this piece of the customer functionality, and another team that owns this piece of the customer functionality, and another team that owns this piece of the customer functionality. So let me move ahead. How much time do I have? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
All right. So I want to point out that we can do this in a distributed way. So this is real-time board with the same exercise. When we started out, the way real-time board works is the same way Google Draw works, which is everybody can draw at the same time, everybody can move stuff at the same time. It's just real-time board comes with stickies and with dots that we can use, and so that's what it looks like. You know, that's what one team's look like, and here's what another team's look like. Another value of digital is we can go get a picture of what a lychee looks like and paste pictures of lychees up there with our lychee order sizing. And so here's a team in Maine. So the team in Maine, it turns out in rural Maine there are not a lot of Microsoft.NET developers. Go figure. And so they're scattered all over the United States, and so this was a team scattered all over the United States. Real-time board, I learned from them. They were using it for another purpose. But we repurposed it for this sizing routine, and suddenly, voila, I finally found the distributed tool for doing this kind of thing, and I think it's really useful. And so instead of snaking, these are rows, because they're easier to move a bunch of stickies all at the same time. So relative sizing is imprecise but adequate. It gives the product owner input to the ROI ordering. When combined with velocity, gives us relative predictability. It enables planning across the organization, and combined with velocity, when we've got 3 sprints worth of velocity, we can average our velocity, and we can say, okay, so we're running at about this rate. We can walk down our backlog, all relatively sized, and walk down our backlog and say, August 15th, this is about where we're going to be. Do we have the right stuff above the line? And we'll be right, plus or minus 20%, provided we don't get a bunch of new requirements in the meantime. And that's a really useful cut to be able to give to our stakeholders, and our stakeholders will begin to have confidence in us at that point. So that's it. So how many questions do I get to take?
Of course.
And we're going to give a book away.
Q&A for 2 minutes, and then 1 minute for the book.
All right, so what we're going to do with the book is I've got some really old Schwab cards that if you don't have a card, if you got a card, put your card in here. If you don't have a card, put your name and email address, yes please, and take the bag too. Name and email address, and I will follow up with a pointer to Steve Bachman's work and a couple of other sizing kinds of things. And I'll send you the discount codes for the book, and I'll send you other stuff. All right, questions? Questions about sizing? Did I answer everything? Oh, there was a question over here I was going to come back to.
ROI.
ROI, what was the question?
How to use the Fibonacci series numbers to calculate ROI?
Yeah. So we can use the same technique for figuring out value. So we want to take our stories, we can take a deck of cards and put them in order by value. What's going to give the most value to our customers? And now we can put Fibonacci numbers on by value, and we can take the value Fibonacci numbers divided by the cost. This is the size,
So
Fibonacci numbers, and now we've got ROI. Yeah. So ROI is value divided by cost.
Right.
And cost is what we've been working on tonight.
Got it. Okay. But who?
And Steve Bachman uses it for value as well as for cost.
But who would do the value?
Product managers.
The product managers.
Yeah, because their job is to understand what customers value the most.
So you fit that into your roadmap to see, like, where?
Yeah, so we're going to give these sizes to our product managers. Our product managers are going to take into account the value, figure the ROI, build the backlog based on ROI. Question.
Do we do there's an expert estimate or experts doing take 2 days, and then average Joe will take 4 days. Decide. Do you put 4 or do you put the 2?
So we don't put either one. We ask the question, where's it go in the snake?
But you do the second pass.
So the second pass is just based on where it goes in the snake. It's already in the snake by then. And it's in the snake because we say, well, we can have Sue do it. We can have Sue do it, but we're going to leverage Bob's experience with the technical data when we do this. Right? So we want to leverage that experience and expertise. We want to do that just as we do on our teams. We want to leverage the experience and expertise with pomegranates and durians.
Question there.
One last question.
Okay. I'm not sure if my question was answered there. If there's a new story coming in.
Yes, if there's a new story coming in. So it's really important when we have new stories coming in that have high value. So like teleportation's coming in. Our CEO, it turns out, doesn't stop ideating when we start working on the project. They just keep ideating along, and they just keep throwing things at us, whether it's the CEO or it's the sales team or the marketing team. So they're throwing stuff at us. A product owner's job is to say, this one's got enough value that it would probably go at the top of the backlog if it's not teleportation. And so 2 days before your sprint planning meeting, so let's say you're on 2-week sprints, you do a sprint planning meeting on Mondays, 2 days before that, so the previous Thursday before your sprint planning meeting, attach a 5 or 10 minute meeting, thinking meeting. Attach that meeting to your daily stand-up. You've got your whole team together. You're going to lay the snake back out again. You're going to take the new stories, all the new stories, the one that's teleportation conceivably, and any other new stories that have come in, you're going to fit them into the snake right then. And now your product owner's got enough information to be able to regroom the backlog based on ROI. Yep. Okay.
Great. Time. I'm gonna put this on you.
You want me to pick one? All right.
Okay.
This is Dorian Johnson.
Oh, that's unfair. You have to pick another.
There you go. See what you lose.
This is Venkata Sarangapani.
He just left as well.
I'm only picking people who leave.
It's a roll call.
Where are you leaving now?
I'm leaving.
This is Teresa Farley. Thank you. Thank you all.
Cool. Great. Thank you so much for all the great engagement tonight. It's amazing.
Thank you
to
all
see.
for all the great engagement.
All right.
Thank you.
So that's Where's the basket for this? Somewhere there, I think. Okay, and so the next one is in June, and again, I think June 1st or 2nd week. I'm just trying to see quickly if I can see the next one. Great software development is everyone's job, and that's on June 5th. It's a Tuesday, and it's going to be in the auditorium, the main hall where we usually meet. So if you have not signed up yet, you should. There are 37 people who have signed up already. And we would love to see you there.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
If you have any takeaways, or you should have takeaways, or any retrospective items for us to see what can we do more, where we can, what we can start doing, all of that, please provide us the feedback there so that we can continually improve. Thank you so much for coming here tonight.
Thank you.